There is a cemetery with no headstones, no flowers, and no names. It lies deep in the blue waters of the Ionian Sea, off the coast of a small island called Vido. The locals call it the Green Cemetery. Here, more than 5,000 souls rest in eternal rest, their bodies sinking into the cold silence of the ocean. They were not sailors. They were farmers, teachers, young boys in love, who had walked hundreds of miles through hell on earth. To understand how an army ended up at the bottom of the sea, look at this map. In 1914, a bullet in Sarajevo did more than kill a crown prince. It unleashed a curse that plunged Europe into a dance of blood and fire. Look at how the giant empires surrounded the tiny kingdom of Serbia. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, like an offended giant, blamed them for everything. They just needed an excuse. At first, the story was an epic one. The Serbian army did the impossible, repelling the invasion twice. They believed that God was on their side. But they were wrong. The gods of war had only granted them a temporary victory to make their eventual downfall all the more bitter. As the winter of 1915 approached, a specter crept into the trenches. It was called typhus. An invisible enemy, the Gray Ghost, killed 200,000 people, including 70,000 soldiers. The entire country had only 400 doctors to fight it. And then the empire struck the final blow. 500,000 enemy troops closed in, attacked from two sides, devastated from within. The capital fell, the army disintegrated. The Serbian command faced an impossible choice. Surrender was destruction. Fighting was suicide. There was only a third way, one not found on any military map: a mad gamble. Put yourself in their shoes for a second. Surrounded by enemies, behind them by a sea that doesn't belong to them, and in the heart of their land by disease. Which path would you choose? They chose the only path their enemies wouldn't dare take. A march through the heart of winter, past the cursed mountains. They called it Golgotha, the crucifixion on Mount Calvary. And among that group there was Luka, only 15 years old, one of 36,000 children considered the future of the army. Little did he know, the mountain that awaited him was more cruel than any enemy. What is a nation without land? It is a river of people. A people uprooted, carrying all that remains of them, their memories, their pain, and a glimmer of hope on their backs. More than 400,000 people set out on a journey into the unknown. They were no longer a retreating army. They were a nation on the move. In the chaos, Luka, 15, tried to keep close to the middle-aged soldier beside him. It was Marco, a neighbor from his village, a tough veteran, now tasked with unofficially keeping an eye on him. Luka's hand tightened on something in his pocket. It was a crumpled photo of his mother and sister smiling under the grape arbor in front of their house. It was all he had left of his old world. Marco placed a heavy hand on his shoulder, his voice hoarse with cold. "Stay close to me, kid. Everything will be okay." The promise, like a candle, flickered in the coming storm. Look at the map again. The huge caravan split into three. The southern army went through Albania with the promise of help. The northern army went into Montenegro to fight alongside the Allies. Both carried hope. But we follow Luka and Marco on the central route, the shortest route, and the road of death. A blood-red streak cutting straight through the heart of the cursed mountains. This army carries the soul of the nation, the government, the treasury, and the 70-year-old king, Peter I, who refused to stay under occupation. Luka saw him, a gaunt old man lying motionless on a simple litter, his eyes closed. He had never seen a king before, and he had imagined something grander. Marco whispered, his voice full of respect. "That's King Peter. As long as he breathes, Serbia lives." For the first time, Luka felt that this journey was not just about saving his own life. He was escorting a symbol, the weakly beating heart of an entire nation. And then, they reached the foot of the mountain. The cursed mountains loomed before them, not as a majestic landscape, but as a giant white wall, a jaw of winter ready to swallow them. The familiar trail disappeared under the first snow of the season. The cold wind cut like a knife, cutting through Luca's thin clothes. He shivered, not just from the cold, but from a primal fear. He looked to Marco, his eyes searching for reassurance. But in the veteran's eyes, Luca saw only the silhouette of the mountain reflected back. The promise of everything will be okay now rang hollow. Their real battle had only just begun. The first thing to disappear was not hope, but food. Within a week, hunger became a single roar that consumed all thoughts. Money became waste paper. Everything lost its value, except a piece of bread. Luca saw Marco do it. The old soldier quietly drew his knife, not to fight, but to cut a strip of leather from his own belt. He dropped it into the small pot of melting snow. Luca watched the leather curl, foaming in the murky water, disgusted. But then his hunger won out. He chewed on a piece of boiled leather, a bitter, tasteless rubber, just to trick his stomach into thinking it was not empty. That was his first meal in hell. But even in that collapse, the sparks of humanity stubbornly persisted. Marco stopped. He knelt beside an old woman collapsed on the side of the road, whose family had been helpless to leave behind. He broke off a small piece of his last piece of bread, a piece as hard as a rock, and placed it in her hand. Luca tugged at his hand, whispering, "We have nothing left, Uncle Marco." Marco looked at him, his eyes sunken, but with a terrifying clarity. "When we have nothing left, kindness is the only thing we have, boy." It was a final act of defiance before the darkness swallowed everything. Soon the road turned into a sprawling cemetery. William G. Shepard, an American journalist, wrote, "Almost the entire road was lined with corpses. Thousands of old men, women, and children lay on the rocks, exhausted and without food, waiting for their end." Luca saw them. Boys about his age, sitting with their backs against a rock, falling into eternal sleep. He stopped crying. His tears had long since frozen. The ultimate collapse of human dignity was captured by a French medical officer. He described the scene as men desperate with hunger, tearing flesh from the dead horses. Luca had seen it from a distance. He turned away, his stomach churning, but the image was seared into his mind forever. Man pushed to his limits was more terrifying than any beast. And when they thought nature had done its worst, man proved himself capable of even greater cruelty. The Albanian tribes, driven by old grudges and the need to survive, began their hunt. They were the ghosts of the mountain, attacking in a flash and then disappearing. A scream was heard not far away. A soldier fell. A small bag of food was taken. A death sentence was carried out. Luca looked at Marco, his voice faltering. "We're going to die here, aren't we?" For the first time, the experienced old soldier had no answer. He just remained silent, his eyes straining at the white snow, where the invisible enemies, hunger, cold, and even humanity, awaited. There are deaths worse than physical death. It is the death of the mind, the decay of the soul, while the body stubbornly clings to life. When the mountain has stripped away all material things, it begins to attack the last stronghold, the human mind. Luca began to see things that were not real. In the blizzard he saw his sister, her hair flying, standing not far away, waving to him. He walked towards her, off the path. Only Marco's iron arms holding him back pulled him back to the terrifying reality. He heard his mother calling his name in the wind. Hallucinations became his only companion in this white hell. Marco, the old soldier, was losing his strength. Fever and pneumonia were eating him from within. The fire needed something more to burn. Marco looked at Luca, then at his pocket. Luca understood. He slowly pulled out the crumpled photo, now frozen with ice. The faces of his mother and sister were blurred. It was the last thing that connected him to the past, to a world of love and warmth. With trembling hands, he placed it in the fire. The photo curled. The image of his family distorted in the flames and turned to ash. They had a few more minutes of warmth. The price was a world. The next morning, Marco could not stand. He knew his journey was over. He looked at Luca, his eyes still frighteningly clear. "Keep going, Luca," he whispered, his voice cracking with coughs. "Don't stop. Survive. That's how you avenge us all." And then Luca did the unthinkable. He turned his back on the man who had saved his life, his uncle, the only father he had on this path. He picked up Marco's rifle, a heavy burden of responsibility, and continued walking alone, without looking back. The boy named Luca died with Marco on that mountainside. The one who walked on was just a ghost, without a name, without a past. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the mountain, the curse of gold continued. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion carrying it, dying in ambushes defending it. Finally, an officer realized the madness. The future of the nation was killing its last remaining men. In a moment of desperation, he pushed a chest of gold off a cliff. An act of liberation. Like Luca, he had to throw away a precious burden in order to survive. And then, after endless weeks, he saw it, a strange scent in the air. A blue line on the horizon. The sea. The people cheering faintly. But Luca didn't. He just stood there, looking at the cold, gray sea. It looked like just another white desert. They have crossed the mountain, but have they escaped hell? Or is this just another cycle of it? Sometimes the gates of hell open at the threshold of heaven. They have reached shore, they are saved. At least, that is what they think. But the Allied ships out at sea are too large to reach the shore. Food and medicine are so close, yet so far away as a mirage. Luca stood there, a ghost among the dying. He saw soldiers who had survived blizzards and ambushes, now collapsing and dying on the beach, at the sight of salvation. It seemed as if the will to survive, the thing that had kept them alive when they had nothing left to cling to, had left them. Luca felt nothing. His pain had turned to a cold emptiness. The evacuation finally began. They were taken to the Greek island of Corfu. But this was not a rescue. It was a hellish transfer from the mountains to the deserted island. The squalid refugee camps quickly turned into hotbeds of disease. The moaning never stopped. Luca looked around and saw only another version of the mountain. The same dying people, only without the snow. The sickest, the hopeless, were taken away. Luca saw them being taken onto small ferries, bound for a nearby barren rocky island. He heard the other soldiers whisper its name in awe. Vito. Death Island. Every afternoon, Luca went to the beach, looking out toward Death Island. He saw the ships leaving, not to return to port, but to the middle of the ocean. And then he saw it. The ships stopped. In the distance he heard the lonely, mournful sound of a trumpet. Then he saw them. The sailors, tipping white-wrapped objects over the side of the ship, one by one, sinking into the blue water. There was no more land on the rocky island to bury the dead. The sea had become the only grave, the green graveyard. Luca stood there, not crying. He just counted. 10, 20, 30. He counted until the ship was empty and turned back. He counted for an entire nation. In that silence, his heart turned to stone. But then the death slowed. Order was restored. Food, medicine, warm clothes finally arrived. For the first time in months, Luca tasted real food. For the first time, he felt the softness of clean wool against his skin. His body, the skeleton that had been through hell, began to heal. The body can be healed, but can a dead soul be revived? Or will it turn into something else entirely? Death and resurrection is never a return. It is a transformation. On the island of Corfu, the Serbian army was reborn. Physically, they were a new army, better equipped, healthier. But spiritually, they were something ancient and terrifying. Luca held his rifle with skill. He no longer spoke of his mother or his sister. He no longer mentioned Marco. He and tens of thousands of other survivors were bound not by comradeship, but by a shared nightmare. They were ghosts of the dead, ghosts of the cursed mountains and spirits of the green graveyard, and they had only one purpose: revenge. In 1918, this demonic army was sent to the Macedonian front. For 2 years, it had been a quagmire of trench warfare. But now the Serbs had arrived. They were an element no strategist could have counted on, an army that no longer feared death. In September 1918, the final offensive was launched. The tip of the spear, the most honorable position, was given to them. When the whistle blew, Luka rushed out of the trench. But he did not fight for king or country. He fought for ghosts. When he looked into the faces of the Bulgarian soldiers, he saw the faces of those who had attacked him on the mountain. When he heard the whistling bullets, he heard the wind howling on the night Marco died. Each enemy killed was another step forward from that snowy hell. He and his comrades attacked with such ferocity that they horrified both enemy and ally. The Central Powers line, which had stood firm for years, shattered like glass. They had done the impossible. They had broken through the lines, forced Bulgaria to surrender, and caused the collapse of the entire southern front. They had liberated their country. When Luka set foot back on his homeland, he fell to his knees. There were no tears, no cheers, just the silence of an exile who had found his way home. They won. From the ashes, a new nation, Yugoslavia, was born. But the victory was built on bones and tears. Albanian Golgotha is no longer a chapter in history. It has become the soul of their people, a scar that will never heal. Luka the boy died on the mountain. Luka the soldier won the war. But Luka's ghost, along with hundreds of thousands of others, will forever patrol the memory of a nation born from its greatest tragedy. Sometimes, the only way for a people to survive is to die and be reborn as something else entirely.